step out early or anything like that. So my name is Emily Hall. This is my second year at Glover Nursery. I have a horticulture degree from Edmonds College in Washington State. I'm very passionate about sustainable practices and being stewards of our land and supporting just other sustainable agriculture and sustainable growing. So that's a little bit about me and why I like soil health. And I think soil science I just think it's really interesting, and it's a lot of stuff you kind of don't think about, but I personally feel like it should be the first thing we think about if we're approaching a new space, or especially if you're having some issues with something. To me, that's kind of the first thing I take a look at when I'm getting into it. So our first little topic is, what is soil? So I feel like, a lot of people will, especially if you come into a nursery, if you say dirt, a lot of the time you will get corrected to soil. So dirt, we kind of more think of, that's like what's on your kitchen floor that you're sweeping up. That's dirt. Soil is outside that we're growing in. It has a use for us, and the actual definition. So it's a mixture of minerals, organic matter, water, air, and microorganisms, and together they support plant growth. It filters water, provides habitat, stores carbon. Soil has a lot of other uses for us besides growing plants. Obviously, we're going to focus on the growing plants part, but it's the basis of life for most of us. One of my favorite quotes about soil is, we owe our existence to the top 6 inches of the earth and the fact that it rains. So I feel like we kind of forget how important that soil is for us and just to support our life. It takes thousands of years to develop, and it's developed through mainly the weathering of the parent material. And it's influenced by the climate, topography, and organisms. And all of that are pretty difficult to, the thing is, it's almost difficult to improve, but it's very easy to destroy. It can be destroyed, honestly, in a matter of seconds. And I feel like one of the biggest examples that we see, especially in our urban, suburban areas, is with development. A lot of places will be, typically it's been used for farmland, could be very good soil, could have very good texture, but when it gets developed into houses or other, retail commercial industries, they use a lot of that heavy machinery. The soil will be compressed because it'll be wet, and then they're using heavy machinery. They're oftentimes scraping away topsoil, bringing topsoil back, and all of that fundamentally changes the soil. And that is an example that happens very quickly. And a lot of the times to bring that back to how it was can be very difficult. And a lot of the times when we're talking about soil and changes of soil, we're talking on a geological timeline, which is a much larger timeline than we're typically used to. We're talking thousands of years to think about how that has developed, how that has shaped how it is. So something like that can be really hard to change. A fun example, the city of Toronto, we'll talk about pH a little later, but the city of Toronto has a very similar pH to us, which is more alkaline. And they have very acidic rain. And it's been something that's been documented and researched for, the past 100 years. So they have a good amount of data to go off of. And you would think that with 100 years of acid rain, that maybe that pH would be lowered a little bit and it would be more acidic, but it has stayed the same. So even when you have something like that is continually, like you would think, be putting inputs into the soil is what it's going to be. So I feel like it's something that we have to understand and work with rather than try to change for what we want it to be. So as the soil is developing, it forms into layers that are known as horizons. And all of those arranged together is what's called the soil profile. And that is depending on, again, the parent materials, ecology, climate, And all of those things are important to know, especially the parent materials, because that's what is going to be the very basic components of that soil. Where did it come from? What was it broken down into? And that can help inform what it is today. So texture, soil structure, chemistry, pH, they're all really critical elements for plant health, and that will all help determine drainage, air circulation, root growth, nutrient uptake, microorganisms, organic material, and that all plays into how our plants are growing and thriving, and maybe also what plants we should be using. So we're first going to talk about soil texture and structure. This is the first thing that's looked at when we're talking about determining qualities of our soil. So texture, it is the comprised percentages of sand, silt, and clay. And so sand is the largest particle, silt is the medium, and then clay is the smallest. And texture, it's those proportions of those particles in the soil. The structure is more referred to as the arrangement of those particles within any given soil. So texture influences a lot of things when it comes to plant health. One of the biggest things is drainage. If you have a soil that's more on the sandy side, that is going to drain pretty quickly, which can be pretty good. You don't have standing water, but on the other hand, that does mean that your soil drains faster, so it's going to dry out faster. So it will need more watering compared to a soil that is more clay. That clay soil, it's not going to drain as quickly, but it is going to hold that water for longer. So you wouldn't need to be watering as often if you have more clay soil versus a sandy soil. The other thing that the texture will influence is its ability to hold on to nutrients. It's very similar with sandy. There is not a lot for those nutrients to bind onto and to hold onto. So those nutrients leach out faster. A clay soil, there's a lot of other chemistry that kind of goes into why clay soil holds onto nutrients so well. I believe the cations are positive. Again, there's some other big chemistry words that go into that, but the clay holds onto nutrients better. So a clay soil is going to have more nutrients in it than a sandy soil. So some of the biggest groupings that we have with soil is obviously we've got clay, silt, sand, and loam. Loam is the ideal soil texture for plant growth. If you look on your handout, you'll see a triangle with a lot of stuff going on. This is a soil texture triangle. So we use something like this to help determine what your texture is. You can see on there, it's got all the different categories of what a soil texture could fall into. So the first thing I want to talk about, let's see here. Okay. So there's a couple ways that you can determine your soil texture. I've flipped my page onto the next one if you want to just follow along. The first one, this is going to be the most accurate, is going to be sending your soil off to a lab. We do have a lab in Utah that's USU. Their analytical laboratories is there where you would send your soil sample off. We do have a QR link, so that takes you to the page where it gives you the information about how to take the soil sample, how to send it in. There's typically a couple different levels of tests you can get that will test a couple different things, and they of course will test more than just your soil texture. So they also will give you an insight to the nutrients in there, the pH, a whole lot of other things. And the thing that's nice about sending your soils to a lab is they will then give you recommendations based off of the sample that you've sent them. So you could give them, say you're doing a lot of vegetables. and you would send them in and specifically be like, this is my vegetable garden, and they would be able to give you recommendations based on that for your vegetable garden. So I think, especially if you are new to an area, new to a site, if you've been having continual issues from year to year and they're not improving based on if you've been trying to do stuff, I think having a soil test can be really helpful to just have that information, because they'll, it takes that guesswork out. It tells you what your soil is, what's going on, where your nutrient levels are, and then from there you can get those recommendations and move forward with that. So I really like a lab test. It's not necessarily something you need to do every year, but it can be helpful to do something every couple of years. The next test that I want to talk about is the jar test. This is really great. It's an at-home experiment. The QR code will take you to, it's like almost a handout that has like the instructions, and it has the information to kind of get your percentages and numbers once you have completed it. So I have an example of a jar test right here. I'm trying to be gentle with it. So how you do a jar test: you get a jar, any size, as long as it has a lid on. That's pretty important. Fill it with some soil. It can be a cup, maybe about half the jar. I like a good amount so you have enough to settle and it's a little easier to see. You'll fill it up with water. I like to cover it, really let it soak. Sometimes you have to fill it up, let it settle, fill it up again. Then you can do a little bit of soap or like a coarse sea salt, and that's just to be an agitator, just to help break up all of those soil components. And then once it's all filled up, you have everything in there. The other thing too is when you're putting your soil in, try if you have any big chunks of rock or like really big chunks of organic material, like a really big wood chip or something like that, go ahead and like filter those out. It doesn't have to be necessarily like screened and perfect like that, but any super big chunks, go ahead and take them out. So once you fill it up, you give it a super good shake. I shake it for a couple minutes. I mean, you could go up to, 5 minutes or so if you want, but you're just really trying to break up all of the particles, really get it all mixed together, and then you let it sit. A good couple days is best. The longest you can let it sit is better. So this has been sitting for maybe 5 days. It did get a little disturbed with me bringing it out and putting it on the table, but you can see it. I know it's a little hard to see from far away, but afterwards we can definitely come up and take a look at it if you would like. But after time, you will see those layers settle out. The first one that settles out is clay. The next one is silt, and at the bottom you have sand, because it'll go based on those particle sizes and density. So I have, and this is something I can pass around too. It's not in color, but this is another example of a jar test I've done. So you can just kind of see those layers a little bit. After it has settled, you can see here I've made some lines on this jar. So after it's settled, you're going to go ahead and find those layers and mark them. You can mark it straight on the jar. This was with like a dry erase marker. I will sometimes use a masking tape that I put on the jar before I start, and then I can mark it on the masking tape. Sometimes it's a little easier for me to see my measurements that way. So after you have determined where your layers are, then you're going to take your measurements. So we are wanting to get the length of those layers, each length of those layers. So we take the total length of all the layers, the length of the individual layers, and from there you can find those percentages. So on an example I have done previously, for my sand, my total height was 1 inch. The height of my silt layer, it was 1 1/8 inch, or 1.125. The height of my clay layer was 3/16 of an inch. So that I also, have the decimal form of all of those. The total height of my layers was 2 and 5/16 inches. So I know the numbers kind of sounds like a lot of just a little jumble, but from there, you know, you can find the percentage. So you'll take that for your sand. It's the sand height over the total height times it by 100. That gives you percentage. So I had 43% sand, 49% silt, and 8% clay. Once you have those percentages, that's when we use our soil texture triangle. So I honestly like to have one printed out because I like to draw on it physically. So what you do is you find each side is on the bottom, it's the percentage of sand. On the right, it's the percentage of silt. And on the left is the percentage of clay. And they have arrows that show where, like, you know, what direction we're going in. Once you have your percentages, you just go on the side that you're doing. You find where your number is and draw a line up or down, whichever way. You draw a line through the triangle. Once you have all three, you kind of see where they intersect. They don't always intersect perfectly, but sometimes, you know, one will kind of be up a little high, two will intersect, but you just kind of see where they intersect the most, and that will tell you where your texture is. So you can see for mine, we're kind of right at the bottom of the loam category. So for me, I said that we were doing loam. So that's kind of how you go through and figure out the soil texture by yourself at home with a jar kit. Go ahead. I just kind of did the top part of it. I got this from my brother's house. He's been doing a lot of work. So he personally had a pile where he's been moving some of his extra soil. But I would also say it depends on what kind of area you're doing. If it's veggie beds, I would just kind of take the first couple. If it's more in the landscape, you could go down a little deeper to kind of see where your plant. I would say it's kind of where your plant's roots are is kind of what you would want to get at. USU wants you to go down further because that's more of I believe the word is composite. It's more of a composite. So they have you go down a good couple inches and they have you get it from a couple different areas. So, but normally for the jar test, I kind of just keep it on top, again, depending on where I'm doing it and what it's being used for. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pass these around so you guys can take a closer look at them if you would like. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about so this is called a texture by feel test. It's a really quick test. You do it just with a handful of soil yourself. I think it's pretty fun. And yeah, you can do it like right out in the field per se. So this flow chart that's over here is what we're going to be following. I'm going to walk through it a little bit first so we kind of understand a little bit what we're doing. And then I'm going to show you one and we're going to do it together. So you start with, it says a heaping tablespoon of soil. So start with like a little bit of soil in your hand. You want it to be damp so that you can knead it. I like to have it a little damp first. So this is my soil that I'm working with. So I've already kind of had this pre-moistened. Otherwise it can be a little hard to get it all wet and kind of get a good ball ready. So I have it a little pre-moistened. As you're going to want to knead it. So again, we're breaking up all of those particles and you want it to be kind of moldable, like a moist putty. So you can kind of add more water, maybe add a little bit more of that soil if it's getting a little too wet. From there, the first question that they ask us is, does it stay in a ball when it's squeezed? With that, we're kind of walking through, is it too dry? Is it too wet? If it's not necessarily too dry or too wet, that's not the issue. If it's just not holding together, you just have sand. So that's kind of that first step that we go through. From there, so we are able to have it to be in a ball. What we're going to do is we're going to form a ribbon with this soil. So you get the ball together. You want to squeeze it between your thumb and your forefinger. And what we're looking for is how long that ribbon is when it breaks, because that's what's going to determine our next part. So the first question is, can you even form a ribbon? Because if you can't form a ribbon, that answers, then we know what it is. But if you can form a ribbon, depending on how long it is when it breaks, is going to be our next category that we go in through. So is it less than an inch? Is it an inch or two? Is it longer than 2 inches? From there, we are going to, where we want to get it really wet, just like a little bit, and we're going to feel it. We're going to see how it feels. Does it feel really smooth? Is it really, really gritty? Or is there not a super gritty or not a super smooth feeling? So those are the main questions that they ask. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you. I should probably take that off. Okay, so I have my soil. Okay, it's a little wet. I do want to be able to get a good chunk of it. Okay, so right now I'm not necessarily able to squeeze it into that ball, and that's just because it's still a little too dry. So I'm going to get a little more water in there. Okay, so I'm able to get my soil ball. So I think we're at a good spot there. Maybe a little wet. Okay, so now we want to really knead it, really get those particles broken up. I think I may have put a little too much water. It's kind of sticking. So this soil is, as you can see, it's very dark. Still a little on the wet side. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. So my first question, I am able to form a ball. So it is not sand. And honestly, it may still be a little wet. Super great outdoor activity. If you got some kids, want to make some mud pies. Okay, that's feeling a lot better. Okay, so it's not like dripping wet like it kind of was before. I'm getting a really nice ball. It's holding together pretty well. Just kind of kneading it a little more to mix in that soil that I had put in there afterwards. Okay, our next step is forming that ribbon. So it says you're going to put it between your thumb and forefinger and gently push it with your thumb, squeezing it upward to form a ribbon. And now remember, the thing that we are watching for is when that ribbon breaks. How long is that ribbon when it breaks? Okay. Okay, so between my thumb and forefinger, forming a ribbon. It is forming a ribbon. It's not very strong. So I would say it broke at an inch. Okay, so that is going to put us, as you can, when you look at the next one, so it's asking how long the ribbon was when it broke. There's 3 different categories in there. We're going to be looking under the first category because this one broke. It was a weak ribbon, less than an inch long before breaking. So now we take a little small pinch of our soil, just a little bit, and we want to get it really wet, and we're going to rub it in our palm with our forefinger, and we are trying to tell how it feels. Is it really gritty? Is it soft? Is it neither super gritty nor super soft? And this one, there is grit, but it's not excessively gritty, and it's not really smooth either. So I'm going to say it's kind of that in between. It's not super smooth, but it's not super gritty either. Okay. So according to our chart, that puts us at, so we're on that first little category on that bottom one. Neither grittiness nor smoothness dominates. And that puts us at loam, which is what, hey Christian, can I get you to, can you help me? I need some paper towels. Just don't want to get everything very messy. So that was also what our jar test said. So I think it's really interesting when they kind of line up like that. Like I said, this is super great to do outside. Cool. Okay. Pardon me while I clean my hands up just the tiniest amount. Thanks. Okay, I think that'll be good enough for now. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so those are some really basic ones you can do at home. I find it really interesting that, I mean, we did 2 different tests. They are at-home tests, so they're not, they're not a lab test, but we still got the same answer on both. So I think they are still pretty accurate, and I would be really curious. Something I want to do is take this same soil, send it off to the lab, and see what the results from the lab say, to just do a general comparison, just to kind of finish up the demonstration. For like a jar test, again, you just fill it up with water, put in an agitator, put the lid on pretty tight. It feels tight enough. And then you just shake it. Go ahead. I just put in like a little pinch. Yeah, just a little bit. And same with soap. It's really just like a drop. You don't really need that much. And then, yeah, you could just, I keep going for like a minute or 2. You're just really trying to break it all up. You'll kind of see how it starts to settle. All right. In there. Cool. Okay, so that's soil texture. Those are our first big main categories. One thing I want to hit on real quick before we move on is just those soil profiles. I want to talk about that a little bit. So our first soil profile is the O horizon, and that is humus. That is going to be like organic matter that's decayed, decomposing. In Utah, we don't specifically have a lot of that O horizon layer. We don't have a lot of like organic material. We're very dry. We're very wet. So we don't have a lot of that decomposing happening in our soils. The next one that we have is A horizon. That's topsoil. That's the pretty, what we're all used to. Mineral matter that's mixed with a little humus. The E horizon is eluviated. So that's kind of when we're getting deeper. It's getting thicker. It's getting more rocks. Then we have subsoil, the parent material, and finally bedrock. Again, something I want to talk about. Yeah, okay, let's talk about this for a little bit. This will lead us into our next category nicely. I want to talk about our parent material and why it's so important. So for our region, for right here, what was here forever ago was Lake Bonneville. And that is what is influencing our soils today. So especially in this valley right here, everything is those decomposed deposits that were moved around from Lake Bonneville. And where that comes from is the eroded materials from the mountains. So that's kind of our main parent material, is what our mountains are, which is a lot of quartz, quartzite, shale stone. That's what a lot of it comes from. And Lake Bonneville obviously eroded that. It pushed it around, and where it settled is that's what our soil is today. So it all comes from Lake Bonneville. As a lot of you are probably familiar with, just like our natural geographic sites, like the point of the mountain. Everyone's familiar with the point of the mountain. You can see pretty distinct shorelines from Lake Bonneville. And the point of the mountain is essentially a sandbar that is a accumulation of deposits from Lake Bonneville, from the tides, everything like that. So it's always important to understand what your parent material is, where your soil comes from, and that's going to give us a lot of insight into what is our soil today. So because a lot of it is deposits from Lake Bonneville, that's why we have a lot of clay and we have a lot of sand regions, like sandy. And now if we go on to our third page, I'm going to talk a little bit about that Utah soils overview. So in Utah as a whole, we have a very big range of soils. We have 8 ecoregions? 7? 7. We have 7 ecoregions in our state. That's quite a bit. There's a lot of different climates that we have just in our state. So that means there's going to be a lot of different soil types, a lot of different profiles. And that's why, talking specifically about us in the Salt Lake Valley, a little bit into Utah Valley, we have Lake Bonneville. So that's where our parent material is. In different parts of the state, it is different. So it's, again, something that I think is really interesting to take into account when you're figuring out all of that. So yeah, we have a wide range of minerals, parent materials, varied topography, different climate conditions, and that is going to create those different soil profiles all across our state. So some of the more common ones, the forested mountain areas. Something like that, that's generally going to be slightly acidic to neutral, because there is a little bit more organic material built up there where you have the trees that are dropping needles and leaves, those decompose, that builds up over time. So those are going to be a little bit more sand or silt heavy. The foothills and the benches of the Salt Lake Valley, those are really sandy deposits of Lake Bonneville. So that has a little bit of organic buildup. Those can be a little bit more neutral with that sand. And then the valley and Tooele, that's a little drier. There's a lot less of that organic material, and they're generally pretty low to moderately alkaline. And again, this all comes from Lake Bonneville. So why is the chemistry and the soil pH so important? So pH, it's a measure of how basic or basic/acidic or alkaline something is. Obviously, specifically, we were talking about soil. Soil pH determines nutrient solubility and uptake and has a very big effect on plant health overall. Decomposing organic material and a higher rainfall contributes to a more acidic soil. So something more like the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of rain, a lot of decomposing organic material, so it's more on the acidic side. When it is hot and arid conditions, not a lot of rainfall, more evaporation, that is going to contribute to a more alkaline soil, which is what we have. We have more evaporation than we do precipitation over the year. So that contributes to very arid climates, very dry soils. And especially it's kind of an interesting when you think about how we have high clay soils as well. When you have a high clay soil and very low moisture, the clay particles align themselves in such a way that they form like layers. I'm sure you've seen, some of those layers, and those can be a little hard to break into, especially with just rain itself. It's hard for water to infiltrate through those layers because they kind of line up, like almost like a shield those individual little particles. Clay particles are so small, you have to have a very specialized microscope to see them. They are very, very small. So when they all line up together like that, it's really hard to get through it. So all of that leads us to having that higher pH, really dry soils. You can see our little chart over there on the left. There's another reason why pH is really important. pH affects the plant's ability to uptake nutrients. I know it's a little small, but our typical pH around here is about 7.5, give or take a little bit. When we are on this chart at 7.5, iron, manganese, boron, copper, and zinc, they start to shrink. So that means that it's harder for the plant to uptake those minerals, even if they're available in the soil. So that's why we see a lot of iron deficiency in especially the valley. Even when I'm driving around, I'll see a lot of iron deficiency on street trees. That presents itself in a way of on the leaves, the veins will still be green, but the leaves themselves are yellow. That's a pretty good indicator of an iron deficiency. And the thing too about iron is that it is a non-translocatable mineral. So something like nitrogen, it's very movable. So it'll take it from like old leaves, give it to new leaves. When you fertilize with a nitrogen, it'll refresh those leaves really quickly. Something like iron, it doesn't move around very easily. It's pretty solid. So once you kind of start to treat it, but even then, those leaves see that impact in those leaves. It'll be with once those new leaves are growing. I did forget to bring something out here, but we have the EDDHA iron. Oh, he brought it. Yes, leaves are yellow, veins stay green. Thank you. You read my mind. Okay, so we have two different options for treating iron deficiencies. They're both chelated or chelated iron, and this one is specifically an EDDHA. These are able to work in soils that are more alkaline. So it's a form of iron that the plant is able to uptake even in those high alkaline soil situations. So this is something that you would use if you are seeing that on your trees. Again, it's typically an indication that you have low iron or low ability to uptake the iron, and you're going to need a form of iron that the tree can uptake in those situations. So either of these are really great, and they can really help your plant. And again, because iron is not very movable, it's also not something that you'll see working really quickly. You'll see it on, essentially, if your newer leaves that are coming out are looking healthy, then you've kind of remedied the situation. But it's not something that will kind of fix those old leaves unless you can do like a foliar spray. That's kind of something, like another thing you can do to try to help those current leaves if that is something that you want. Yeah, it would kind of depend on the specific tree. Some trees are more susceptible to iron deficiency. So like how low that iron is. But if you have been having issues, I would probably do it yearly. And the best time to do that, same with like a fertilizer application, would be in spring. And I would say right when you're seeing bud break. Because that is when that tree is going to be starting to wake up, and that's when the pull of those roots is going to be the strongest, because there's a water balance that the tree has, and when it's waking up, it's starting to pull the water through the tree more. So how you use them, you mix them in water and you water it down at the roots. So when that tree is pulling the most water through, that's the best time to do that treatment. And then the idea behind it would be that it will pull like as much of that iron up through the whole tree as possible. And I believe you can do, I'd have to double check for like the repeat coverage. But you could probably do this maybe 2 to 3 times in the beginning of spring, maybe 2 to 3 weeks apart if it's something you've been having issues with. So yeah, it's a really good thing to do. And again, you can also do it with your fertilizer. We have another, it's like a root stimulator. So it's also a fertilizer, but it does have rooting hormones in there. So it's something as well to just kind of help those roots out, help give that tree a nice burst of energy right at the beginning of spring. Okay. I'm going to flip to the back of this page real quick, and then we'll come back to that other section. Let's check my time. Okay, cool. So first, let's talk about some of the common problems that with our Utah soils. Again, so we talked about high pH. That leads to reduced nutrient availability, especially chlorosis. Neutral symptoms, perfect. Okay, yep, treat with EDDHA. The other thing you can do with a high alkaline is try to supplement with sulfur. Sulfur is something that will bring the pH down. Now, again, remember, this isn't something that's going to be a permanent fix. It's really hard, like we talked about earlier, it's really hard to permanently change our soils. But this is something that can kind of help it out. It is something that you would need continued applications year after year. Something like the ammonium sulfate, this is going to be more of a fast release. This is also a fertilizer. So these three numbers, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So it's 2100. So there's a lot of nitrogen in this. So it is also a fertilizer. So this is something that I would probably use at the beginning of the season. And again, because it is a fast acting, it is also going to be a fast leacher, I guess you could say. It's going to work quickly, but it's not going to work for very long. The other thing you could use, this is just a soil sulfur. This isn't a fertilizer at all. There's no other nutrients in this. This is just sulfur. So this is very slow acting, but it will stay in your soils for longer. So at the beginning of the year, you could do like a combo of each of both of these. So you'd have the fast acting that has a fertilizer, and as this is kind of leaching out, then the soil sulfur would be taking effect. So that's kind of a little combo you could use to kind of help out. Ranges, for the most part, they can still thrive here in the climate, but something that a lot of people really like hydrangeas for is the flower colors can change, and they change based on pH. So when it is a more alkaline pH, those flowers are going to be more pinky. When you have a more acidic pH, those flowers are going to be more blue. So a lot of people are going after that blue color, so they want that lower pH. So that's, if that's something you want to do, that's probably something you're going to need to do every year. But I mean, if that's what you want, that's what you want to do, and I love that. So that's kind of maybe a reason why you would do something like this every year. Again, there's a lot of other plants that kind of prefer higher acidity. I do believe we have some lists if that is something that you have questions about. If you're like maybe struggling with a plant, some quick examples are like rhododendrons, azaleas, blueberries. They don't do super well in our climate because they want that higher acidity. Okay. The next common problem is high salinity. So that's just a buildup of salts. That comes from a couple different ways. Evaporation, we talked about, we have more evaporation than precipitation. So there's a buildup from that. The other big thing is going to be secondary water. Depending on where you live, you may be on secondary water, and that secondary water could come from Utah Lake, which has a lot of salts in there. So you have, over time, if that's something that you have, you are just going to naturally have a buildup of salts and other minerals in your environment. That's another big thing to keep in mind when you're doing plant selection, because there are some plants that can handle that high salinity than others. Other things that contribute to high salinity is excessive fertilizer use and road salts. I mean, we have a lot of salt on our roads in the winter. That is inevitably going to end up in our soils and just kind of stick around. So again, just things to kind of keep in mind. It may not necessarily harm your plants, but it's kind of something to be aware of. Some solutions to high salinity, again, utilize more salt tolerant plants. We can amend our soil with organic matter for better drainage. And another thing you can do is you can flush your plants with a culinary water. So a lot of the times, even if you have a secondary water for your irrigation, the water that's coming off your house could be a culinary water, and you can give your plants a really good flush to kind of help leach some of that salt away. I mean, I would maybe just say depends. Yeah, or maybe even like a couple times a season. It could depend on the plant. Some are very, very intolerant. So if you have something that's like much more sensitive, I would probably do it more often. But if it's something that's kind of like medium, yeah, maybe a couple waterings, maybe once a month, something like that. Okay, another common problem is poor drainage. Again, like that's from like when we have dense clay. Another thing is compaction that's going to lead to poor drainage when we don't have a lot of air in those soil aggregates. There's not a good texture. There's not a good structure in there. So it can lead to just standing water, and that's not super good for our roots. The other thing too is nutrients can leach out like I said, nutrients leach out quicker in the faster draining, and they could build up maybe a little too much in a denser clay. So a solution could be, a big thing is always going to be amending with organic material. We're trying to get to that more loamy texture. And then when it comes to, just organic material. Erosion. That's, when that top layer is being disturbed by wind, water. The big thing is that happens when there's bare soil, when there's stuff that's not planted there, or especially in overly tilled areas where that soil texture and structure has kind of been depleted and disrupted. So a big thing to try to do is to not try to excessively till. Tilling can be helpful for certain reasons, but maybe it's not something we need to do in every section every single year. Over tilling, like we said, it leads to erosion, it leads to compaction, it leads us to kind of destroying that natural soil texture that we've built up over time. And then it's kind of like a waste of time and energy if we're kind of doing this and there's not a real reason. Like I said, there could be some very big reasons why you need to till. Maybe it's a new site, it's very hard, you need to break it up, or you want to till in organic material, plant matter. But it's not something I would feel like I need to do in every single area every single year. Another big thing that can help with erosion is just having plant coverage, having landscape plants, having a ground cover, having mulch, and also planting a cover crop. I'll talk about cover crops in a little bit when we get to that last section that we went over. But I am a big fan of cover crops. Okay, one of the last kind of big problems we deal with is excessive herbicide use. That can lead to just a general negative impact on our soil ecosystems, its structure, and the microbiome health. And sometimes that stays in our soils for a very long time. There can be a really long residual that it's in there. And then depending on like where you're located, depending on how much it is, that can then like leach into our groundwater and can be harmful to us ourselves. Solutions are to use more of an IPM method first. IPM stands for Integrative Pest Management, and it's kind of like a pyramid of steps you would go through first before you would reach for a chemical. Sometimes there's other things we can be doing to prevent or mitigate our problems that are a little easier than just reaching for a chemical. And that overall can kind of lead to a healthier ecosystem. Something else that I find interesting in high alkaline and arid climates is in our soil, we don't have a lot of that natural microbiome that helps with that decomposition. So something like using excessive herbicides can deplete that even further when it's not something we have a lot to begin with. So, okay, I want to jump back to, can I change my soil? Okay, this will kind of be the last, this will be our last topic, and then we'll have our Q&A time. So we have talked about it is very difficult to change our soil, especially in our lives, which is a very short time on that geological time frame. There can be some strategies to kind of help improve your soils, improve like their drainage, improve their texture. As a rule of thumb, the larger the plant, the more difficult or costly it will be to address some of these issues. So again, understanding some of these basic things before you start planting can help inform your plant choice. And that's just going to be a little bit easier down the road if you have plants that are more adapted to the soil that you have to begin with, rather uphill battle of changing your soil to fit the plants that you want. So if we have something like edible gardens, veggie gardens, fruit, everything like that, there's a couple different things that we can do to really help out our structure, our drainage, our erosion. One of my favorite things is a cover crop. So this is actually a very specific cover crop blend that we created with a local seed company. We just got it in, so I'm very excited. It's a blend of, it's about 50% oats, 40% hairy vetch, 9% red clover. This is something that's really great to put on before winter. The ideal time to kind of put it in and let it get, because you want to put it on where it has enough time to germinate and get established before our hard freeze. So typically like end of August, beginning of September, I like to give it about at least a month and a half to 2 months to get established before our first frost date. And how this helps, there's a lot of different reasons. So let me back up. I'm going to talk about the general, like how you use a cover crop first. So this would be something, so say you have a veggie bed, it's done for the season or it's getting close to be done. You can still plant this even if you have plants in there, depending on what it is. Like if it's tomatoes or something that's taller, you can still plant this in there so it'll start germinating and getting established. When those tomatoes are done, you can go ahead and take them out, and this will hopefully be established before that first frost. They'll still, the three different types have a relatively good like winter hardiness, so they'll kind of still be growing a little bit. They won't completely die off from the winter. Just by having that plant material over your veggie beds for the winter is going to keep all of your soil in your beds. You're not going to have it leached off by runoff, by snow melt, by wind. The plants are there covering that soil, so that soil is staying there. When it comes time for spring, the best time, you're going to want to terminate this just before these go to flower. Once these go to flower, you're going to get seeds, and then sometimes cover crops in general could become almost weedy, just meaning that it's something that you don't want in your beds at that time. So we just don't want these producing seeds in our beds. So if you notice that they start to have flowers, I would go ahead and cut them down. Or if you have your plan of what you're wanting to plant, if you're doing early spring crops, you're going to want to terminate this at least 2 to 3 weeks before you're ready to plant. So how I would terminate this is cut it, I like getting like those big shears. Cut it right at the base of the plant. You want to leave the roots in that soil. The red clover is a legume. Legumes have these really interesting nodules on their roots that help fix nitrogen. So you want to, thing is those roots have made air pockets. They have made texture in that soil. If you just pull all that out, you're pulling out that texture and support that you have created in that soil. And then the other thing is that's organic material. That's going to break down, it's going to decompose, that's giving you nutrients that way, and that's keeping that soil structure in place. What you're going to do with the tops of them now That's a lot of really good organic material. We don't want to let that go to waste. What I like to do is, you can do it in the bed, or you can take them out, put them in like a wheelbarrow or a bucket, and I like to chop them up a little further. Then you're going to put those back over your beds, and you can kind of like till them in a little, like turn them in a little bit. Again, you're not wanting to like disturb your soil too much with something like tilling. Just turn it over, and you want to let that decompose. Again, that's why I said you're going to want to wait maybe like 2 to 3 weeks after terminating before planting in, because you just want to give that a little bit of time to start decomposing. So that's kind of the life cycle of a cover crop. They can be used at other times in the year, if just kind of depending on what's going on with your veggie garden. Again, I love cover crop. We just got these in. We have them in 1 pound bags, and a pound can cover 16 to 32 square feet. So just kind of depending on how thick you want that coverage to be. Okay, other things with edible gardens that can help with our soil is crop rotation. There's a couple reasons why that helps. Different crops are going to be using different nutrients. I forget the exact order, but you have leaves, roots, fruit, one more. There's like 4 categories, and you rotate them based on that category, because those crops are using those like different nutrients. So you're rotating it for nutrient use. The other reason that is helpful is pest problems. When you have the same crop in the same spot year after year, the pests are going to know that it's there, and then they're going to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. So you're going to have a particular pest if you keep that same area. So rotating crops is a really great way to help cut down on pest problems. And then the last one, we've talked about it a lot, is minimize tilling. So we're just trying to not disrupt our soil ecosystem and our texture that we've been working on building. And then another big one, this is going to be good for everything. We'll kind of start by going into the 4 landscapes area, but it's going to be amending and mulching with organic material. This right here is an organic compost, just an example. So using an organic compost and amending with that, again, like gently turning it into our soils, that's giving us good nutrients, and it's going to help with drainage if you have clay or sandy soil. If you have sandy soil, it helps provide something for that water and nutrients to hold on to. If you have clay soil, it helps break up that clay soil to help with the drainage. So no matter what issues you have with your soil texture, amending with organic compost, organic material, it's going to help you either way. What was that? I'm so sorry.
For the compost, when you put it on, is it better to do it in the fall or in the spring?
You can do it in both. I typically have done it in both, especially when I am doing a lot of veggie crops or even in landscaping, because I like to have it at the beginning of spring to obviously help with more nutrients, and then again in fall to kind of help get those soils ready for the next spring and to help give some cover for the winter. So yeah, you can do it in both if you want. Of course. We talked about reducing our especially synthetic fertilizer use, because that helps with our salt buildup. Using something like a mycorrhizal product. So we talked about how our soils have a very low natural microbiome, and what goes along with that is mycelium. Mycelium is mushrooms. If you're in the forest and you pick up a log and you see like that white spider web looking like stuff, that's actually mycelium. And mycelium helps with a lot when it comes to water sharing, nutrient sharing. There's a lot of like really interesting research that's been done about it, and mycorrhizae in general. If that's something you have questions about, I could talk about it for a very long time. So I will try to limit that right now. But anyways, using a mycorrhizal product when you are planting can really help with nutrient and water uptake. If you have ever bought landscape plants from us, we do have a mycorrhizal product. It's in a blue tub. It's called Mike. The nice thing about it is it extends our warranty for our plants, which I think is amazing. But it's a really good mycorrhizal product, which helps inoculate the soil for that mycelium so that it binds to those roots and forms fine root hairs to help with water and nutrient uptake. And then the last thing I want to talk about is growing native or plant acclimated to our area. We have a really nice, if you see that sign that says drought tolerant over there, we have a really nice native plant section. It's one of my favorites to go walk around. One of the easiest things to do in an environment where we've got tough soils, we've got tough conditions, is to plant the plants that have been here before we were. They've adapted. They're used to this. They're used to the heat. Now, again, something we did mention, Utah has a lot of different ecoregions. So what is native and what will work could still kind of be something to look into. There are some that are a little bit more water loving and some that are a little bit more of that drought tolerant, zero escaping aspect. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. But issues, or if you want something that's going to be just more resilient in your area, then using native plants, and again, plants that have just like acclimated to our area, is going to be much easier for you in the long run. They need less inputs of, water, fertilizer, iron, or any, just less inputs in general from you, and they will typically thrive better. And then the other thing is, a lot of our native plants are really good for native bees and native pollinators. So it's something that they have developed with each other over time. And Utah has, isn't it over like 1,000? Yeah, 1,000 native bee species. So it's more than the whole combined East Coast. So we have a lot of native bees and a lot of native pollinators, and some of those rely very heavily on like very specific native plants. So by planting native, we can support, it's better for our soils, it's better for our pollinators, and better for our just ecosystems in general. It's a little easier on it, just kind of going with the flow of what's been here and what is going to continue to be here without us. All right, so that's what I have to present. So we've got some time. Yeah, we got some time for questions. So let's see, does anybody have any questions for me? Go ahead.
You said you were going to post this recording. Where do you post it?
Yes. So these get posted on our YouTube. So he asked about where we post our live recordings. After it like has to process and download. I don't know. There's more techie stuff. I obviously am a more outside person. But we post it to our YouTube, and then I typically do try to share it on our Facebook. So yes, about that. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
How often would you rotate your crops? And the second question is, would you ever crop cover flower beds?
Okay, cool. So we got some good questions. How often would we rotate crops, and would we cover crop other things like a flower bed? Depending